Okay, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. And welcome to the 7th night majlis in the children's program. Before we start, I just wanted to just do a quick recap of what we covered yesterday. Yesterday we talked about Bibi Zainab, and we talked about her special qualities and characteristics and why she played such an important role in Karbala. So can anyone remember any of her titles that we learned yesterday? There were a few different, 3 or 4 different titles that we learned of hers. Okay, Sakina, let's start. Something Bani Hashim. Do you remember? It's Aqila to Bani Hashim. Very good. And what does that mean? Does anyone remember? Yes, Ali? No, that's her name itself. So remember that word that starts with N, yes, the noble woman of Banu Hashim. Okay. All right. Another title. Yes, Amina. Alima, ghair muallam. What does that mean? Yes, Amina. A scholar or a very knowledgeable lady who hadn't been taught by anyone. She didn't have a teacher, but she knew. And the third one was to do with tragedies. Do you remember? What's the translation? Do you remember? The mother of tragedies, Ummul Masaib. Okay? You know, when we come to the majlis of Karbala and Imam Hussein, at the end of the majlis we do Masaib. We talk about Masaib. That's about the tragedy part of what happened in these nights on the day of Ashura. That's called Masaib. And Bibi Zainab was Ummul Masaib. She was the mother of all those tragedies. Okay, so those were her 3 titles. And Ali, you were telling us that what did you say? She was the beauty. She was the beauty of her father, and that's the meaning of her actual name, Zainab, because the word Zainab can be split into 2, Zain and Ab. Ab means father, and Zain means beauty. So she was Zainab, she was the beauty of her father. Yes. Yes, and another possible meaning of Zainab is also that it was a beautiful tree. Okay, so it could have one of those 2 meanings. Okay, what about some of her characteristics that we spoke about? Remember, we said that she had many, many qualities which were outstanding. And we're going to talk about one of them in particular today. But can you think of any of the things that she was well known for? Well, we've already said that she was very knowledgeable because we said she was alima. We said she had a few other qualities. Isa, tell me one. She was eloquent. Perfect. That's the one I wanted to talk about today, because if you can see the title of today's lesson, it's Reflection on Sayyida Zainab's Sermon. So remember we said that she gave a lot of sermons and speeches throughout her life, particularly after the day of Ashura, when the ladies of the Ahlul Bayt were taken from Karbala to Kufa to Sham and back to Medina. She gave a lot of speeches and sermons in the court of Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad and in front of Yazid. And remember what we said about that? Another quality of her, she was very eloquent in the court, and she was also very brave. I can't hear you. That's another thing. But she was very brave because she had to stand up to the leaders at that time. When she was a prisoner, she was tied in chains or ropes, but she was still able to be brave and stand up in front of them. And another quality was that she had a very strong faith in Allah. She knew a lot of things from the Quran, and she was able to quote from the Quran as well. So these were some of her many qualities. And then at the end of that lesson, we talked about her two sons in the Masa'ib part. Do you remember their name, Fatima? Hazrat On and Muhammad. And when they were just very young boys, Bibi Zainab had taken them with her on this journey to Karbala because she wanted to sacrifice something of her own. So in the cause of Islam. So she asked Imam Hussein that these two boys, send them on the battlefield on my behalf because they will be my sacrifice on the day of Ashura. Okay, so today we're going to talk about one of the particular sermons of Bibi Zainab. We're going to do some reflection on that sermon. Let's see what we're going to learn, what the objectives of today's lesson are. So we will discuss the background of Sayyidah Zainab's khutbah. Khutbah is the Arabic word for sermon in the court of Yazid. We're going to examine and interpret certain sections of her khutbah, and we'll try and see what lessons we can learn from those sermons. And what are the key words for today? The first one is khutbah, which is the Arabic word for sermon or lecture. And the other one is Ashura. And that we know it refers to the 10th day of Muharram, which is the day of Ashura when the battle took place. Okay? These nights which lead up to the 10th night, every night from now on, we will be remembering a different personality who fought in the battle, someone from Imam Hussein's family. But remember that all the battle took place on the day of Ashura itself. It didn't take place at night, or it didn't take place during the days of Muharram. Early days, it took place only on the day of Ashura. Okay, is it to do with what we're doing? Yes, Shayan, quickly, please. Correct. The battle started on the day of Ashura after the Azan. Yes? Correct. We commemorate different people on different nights because we want to be able to recognize each person and talk about them and give them ways to remember them. That's why we start talking about different people on the nights that lead up to Ashura. Yes, Arman. Well, they had already, Imam Hussein and his caravan had already reached Karbala by this time, and they were camped over there. And from the 7th day onwards, Yazid's army stopped water, and they were running out of food as well. So everyone in Imam Hussein's caravan was becoming thirsty. But today, what we're going to talk about is what happened after the day of Ashura. So we're just going forward a little bit in time. Because we discussed Bibi Zainab's eloquence yesterday, I want to just talk about the sermon that she gave, and that took place after the day of Ashura in the next few days. Okay, so a little bit of background. So on the 10th of Muharram, in the year 61 after Hijrah, the army of Yazid killed Imam Hussein, his family, and his companions. And then what happened was that the army took all the surviving members of Imam Hussein's caravan as prisoners, and most of these were ladies and children, because all the adult men had gone to the battlefield and they had died, or they were martyred on the battlefield. So mainly the people who were left were the ladies of the Ahlul Bayt. There were a lot of children. There was one man who was left. You know who that was? Yes, Zainab? The fourth Imam, Imam Zainul Abidin. And in fact, Imam Zainul Abidin became the Imam when Imam Hussein was martyred. That's when Imam Zainul Abidin became the fourth Imam. And I wanted to tell you this earlier as well. that Imam Zainul Abidin, do you remember we talked about how Bibi Zainab's name is made of two parts, Zain and Ab? Imam Zainul Abidin's name is Ali, but his title is Zainul Abidin. Now that's the same Zain, which is part of Bibi Zainab's name. Zain Ab, Zainul Abidin. Do you know what Zainul Abidin means? Do you know? Have a guess. The best of worshippers. So Zain actually means beauty or something that's very good or something that is the best. So Imam Zainul Abidin is known as Zainul Abidin. He is the best of worshippers or a very beautiful worshipper because he spent a lot of his time doing sajda and worshipping and praying to Allah. In the next few nights, we'll be talking about Imam Zainul Abidin as well, but I thought I would tell you that. And Zaina, your name, Zaina, is from that same Zain. Did you know that? So it also means beautiful, a beautiful girl or something that's beautiful. Okay, so the caravan consisted mainly of women, children. Our fourth Imam Zain, Imam Zainul Abidin, who was sick on the day of Ashura. And also there was our fifth Imam, Muhammad Baqir, but he was only a child at that time. He wasn't an Imam, okay? Because the fourth Imam, Imam Zainul Abidin, became the Imam when Imam Hussein was killed. The Ahlul Bayt and their companions were forced to walk from Karbala to Kufa, and then they went to Sham, where Yazid's capital was. Yazid's palace was in Sham, which is now known as Damascus. It has been narrated that when the Ahlul Bayt came before Yazid, the head of Imam Hussein was there on a spear, and Yazid began to poke at Imam Hussein's head with a stick. When this happened, there was a companion of Prophet Muhammad who was present in the palace at that time, and he was very angry when Yazid started to do that. And then Yazid began to recite some poetry which was against Islam, and it was about his victory. He was very happy that he had killed all the men. He had killed Imam Hussein and all his companions and all the family men in the Ahlul Bayt who were there, and he thought he was the victor. He thought he had won the battle. And he was talking about how he was taking revenge for the death of his ancestors who had been killed in the Battle of Badr. The Battle of Badr took place many years ago when Prophet Muhammad was alive. It was the first battle that Prophet Muhammad led as a prophet. And in that battle, Yazid's ancestors had been killed. So what Yazid said was he was claiming victory and he was taking revenge for that battle many, many years ago. Now, when Yazid did this, what happened was that Bibi Zainab stood up. She got very angry because Yazid was not speaking the truth. And she gave this beautiful khutbah or sermon. Khutbah, as we said, is the Arabic word for lecture or speech. And in this lesson, we're going to look at some of the parts of the khutbah that Bibi Zainab said on that day and what we can learn from those. So the first part of the khutbah is that our central focus is Allah. Now, do you remember the word that we have been talking about, which in the last few days we've said it a few times, which means that everything we do is for Allah. When we do anything, we put Allah in front of us, or we always remember Allah. What is the word that means that? Sorry? No, that's a different thing. Do you have an idea? Tawheed means unity, but this word starts with a T as well. Zaina? Taqwa. Okay? Taqwa, remember, is piety, and taqwa is a way of putting Allah at the beginning of everything we do. So when the way we say Bismillah before we start doing anything, we're supposed to say Bismillah because we are remembering Allah before we do whatever it is that we're going to do. So when we have piety, when we have taqwa, then we always think, how would Allah feel if I did this? Or how would Allah feel about what I'm going to do now? Or what would Allah want me to do? Before we do anything in our day, we think of Allah. And when we do that, then we can become pious, we can have taqwa, because we always consider whether Allah will be pleased with what we are doing or whether Allah would be displeased with what we are doing. So Bibi Zainab began this khutbah first by praising Allah, and then she also finished it by praising Allah. To begin her khutbah, she said, all praise is due to Allah, the Lord of the worlds. May Allah's blessing be upon Rasulullah, Muhammad, and his entire progeny. Progeny means all his children and his grandchildren and all the family that came after Prophet Muhammad. And then Bibi Zainab, because remember, Yazid had started talking about how he was taking revenge for the death of his ancestors in the Battle of Badr, which Prophet Muhammad had led. So Bibi Zainab was reminding everyone, she started by praising Allah. And then she said she was sending Allah's blessings on Prophet Muhammad and his entire family. And that's what you were talking about, the dua sandwich. When we say salawat, we send blessings, we ask Allah and the angels to send blessings on Prophet Muhammad and the Ahlul Bayt. So Bibi Zainab then finished the khutbah again by saying, all praise is for Allah, who destined salvation and blessings for the first group of us and martyrdom and mercy for the last amongst us. We appeal to Allah so that He may complete their rewards and multiply them, and may duly bless the Khalifat to us. He is certainly kind and merciful, and Allah is enough for us. He is the best disposer of affairs. That means Allah is the one who decides what is going to happen. Now, what can we learn from this? Bibi Zainab, remember at that time, she was a prisoner. She had just lost her brother, she had lost her sons, she had lost her nephews, she had lost many of her close family members and the companions of Imam Hussein as well. And after the men had been martyred, Yazid's army collected all the women, tied them up, they burnt the tents. Can you imagine how Bibi Zainab was feeling? Because she was in charge of all the women. She had to look after all the women and the children who were crying and very upset and hungry, and all these kind of feelings were going on. And then they were then taken on foot. They had to walk from Karbala to Kufa and then to Sham. So by the time they arrived in Sham, can you imagine how tired and how hungry and how sad Bibi Zainab was feeling? But what does she do? She still begins her khutbah by praising Allah. She still asks Allah to send blessings on Rasulullah, because she remembered that everything that had taken place on the day of Ashura and before it and after it was for the sake of Allah and for saving Islam. So she was focusing on Islam and what Allah wanted her to do. Now, what we learn from what Bibi Zainab said is this: when life is comfortable and nothing is wrong, it can be easy to say that we believe in Allah. We can praise Allah and we can thank Him for all the things He has given us, because we all have food and houses and parents to look after us and things to play with and things to use. But when things become tough, when they're difficult, it can be very difficult to be happy and to thank Allah. We can sometimes feel, why is this happening to me? Why am I so sad? Why don't I have this when other people have this? Or why am I sick when my friends aren't sick? Despite everything that Bibi Zainab went through, she continued to glorify Allah and acknowledged His power and how He was ultimately the one in control, and He was kind and He was merciful. She knew that Allah was the best in taking care of everything, and she never lost her faith and her trust in Allah. Allah was the beginning and the end of everything that the Ahlul Bayt did. Considering that prior to this khutbah, Bibi Zainab, as I said, had just witnessed the tragedy of Karbala, she still had hope in Allah. She wasn't bitter about what had happened. She was sad, because Imam Hussein and his companions and the family had been martyred. But she also made the point that Allah was always in control. Allah was in charge. Allah knows everything that's going to happen. And she knew that Allah was just and Allah would deal with those who were tyrants and cruel leaders in his own way. Let me finish talking and then I will answer questions or ask them, okay? Thank you. And the other thing was that she also knew that ultimately the victorious person wasn't Yazid, but it was Imam Hussein, because Imam Hussein had succeeded in making sure that Islam was going to remain alive. Okay, when we go through hardships in life, it's important to remember how the tragedy of Karbala was handled by the Ahlul Bayt. Even when things seem to be terrible, it's important to remember, like the Ahlul Bayt always did, that sometimes when things happen, there is a reason behind them, or there might be a point to everything. When you're suffering or when you're sick, there might be a point to it, and that Allah is always in control of everything. Even when Hazrat Ali Asghar was killed, he was a 6-month-old baby of Imam Hussein. Imam Hussein was supposed to have said, "What is happening to me is easy." He meant that I can deal with it, I can accept this because it is happening under the eyes of Allah. What he meant was that Allah sees what is happening, Allah knows, and Allah will look after everything. Allah is responsible for everything. And this whole tragedy of Karbala reminds us that we should always, when we need help, where should we turn to? Whom should we ask for help? Yes, Zainab? We should always ask Allah for help. We should always pray to Allah. Bibi Zainab says somewhere else in this same sermon, Bibi Zainab says, "To Allah is my complaint, and upon Him do I rely." That means anytime you want to complain about something, or you are upset, or you are sad, you complain to Allah and you trust that Allah will look after you. In Surah Fatiha, do you know when we say, "Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'in"? Iyaka na'budu means surely we pray to you, and iyaka nasta'in means to you alone do we turn for help. So remember that when we need help, we always have to turn to Allah. And this is what Bibi Zainab taught us in that first part of her sermon, when she began and ended her sermon with remembering Allah. The second part of this sermon is about the status in front of Allah. Now, remember that Yazid thought that he had been victorious because he had a big army and his army had killed all the men. But Yazid didn't remember that Imam Hussein was the grandson of the Prophet of God. And Imam Hussein was the one who was trying to save Islam. Yazid was not a good Muslim leader. So what Bibi Zainab said to Yazid was this: "Oh Yazid, do you think that when you blocked all our avenues of the earth and the horizons of the heavens before us, means when you stopped us, when you trapped us over here on this battlefield, you made us captives. Do you think that we are worthless in the eyes of Allah and that Allah has given respect to you?" That's what she told Yazid. "Do you think that you have a great status with Allah? You turn your nose up with pride, you are elated, you are happy, and you are joyful because you think that everyone else is saying yes to Yazid. You think everyone is listening to you. We have become your prisoners. You think that everything is okay. But what you have forgotten is what Allah has said." And then she quoted this verse from Surah Al Imran, which says, "Don't let the faithless suppose that the respite we grant them is good for them. We give them respite only that they may increase in sin, and there is a punishment for them." So what she was telling Yazid is this: in this verse in the Quran in Surah Al Imran, Allah says that those people who don't have faith, we give them a time to do whatever sins they want. Let them do as many sins as they want. Some of them will keep doing more sins, like Yazid. He didn't have any pity or any sorrow for all the people of Imam Hussein's family that he killed. He didn't have pity for a 6-month-old baby, did he? He told his soldiers to kill even a baby. But what he didn't know was this: Allah has said that those people who don't have faith, they will continue doing sins, but what they don't know is that there is a punishment for them at the end of it. And in this lesson, in this part of the khutbah, Bibi Zainab was reminding Yazid that their position in this world, so Yazid was the ruler and in power, and Bibi Zainab was his prisoner, was not an accurate reflection of how their position was in front of Allah. Because in front of Allah, Yazid was a sinner, and Bibi Zainab was the one who had made the sacrifice in the name of Islam. Okay? So in front of Allah, in the eyes of Allah, what matters is our piety and our taqwa, not our position, not the fact that we are a leader or a king or a ruler or that we have wealth. Allah looks at our actions and our behavior. In fact, in this ayat in Surah Al-Hujurat, this is a very important verse, because in this verse, Allah says, the noblest of you in the sight of Allah is the most God-wary, the one who has the most taqwa. Allah is all-knowing, all-aware. So Allah says in this verse that the best one in my eyes is the one who has the most taqwa. That's why this word taqwa is very important for us to remember and to try and have in our lives. Okay. Yes, Amina, do you have something to say very quickly? Question. Yeah. He was probably a young child at that time, yes. Well, he was older, but there were a lot of young children there at that time, but they didn't all go onto the battlefield. Well, there were other young children, but everyone didn't go out onto the battlefield because some were just very young. And Hazrat Ali Asghar was a different case of itself in himself. Okay, so because Hazrat Ali Asghar, Imam Hussein took him on the battlefield to ask for water for him. He was very thirsty, and he went onto the battlefield with Hazrat Ali Asghar, and he asked the army of Yazid, "Is there anyone that can give this baby water?" And the reply was not water for a thirsty baby, but an arrow. So that was what happened with Hazrat Ali Asghar. Okay, and I think I'll just finish. We'll talk about it a bit later on because I need to make sure that we finish this lesson. Okay, before we'll talk about it a bit later at the end. So the third part of the sermon of Bibi Zainab was about Yazid's win, because that win of Yazid, that victory of Yazid was just for that time, whereas Imam Hussein's victory was a victory that was going to last forever. So what Bibi Zainab said to Yazid in the sermon is that you will soon go before Rasulullah in the state that you spilled the blood of his own progeny and you violated the sanctity of his own flesh. Means that when you, on the day of judgment, when you stand before Allah and Rasulullah will be there, you will be guilty of having killed the flesh and blood of Rasulullah because you killed his grandson and the children of the grandson. Allah will gather the Ahlul Bayt together and he will give them back their rights. Okay, so in this verse from Surah Al Imran, what Allah says is, those who are killed in the way of Allah are not dead. Those who are martyred, they never die because they are always living and they are always remembered. So remember how we said that someone who is martyred in the way of Allah is always, his memory is always alive, in the same way that we always remember Imam Hussein. Now, what lessons do we learn from this third part of the sermon? When we look at the situation the way it was, it seemed like Yazid's army was victorious. Yazid had won because he had killed Imam Hussein and all the men who were there that day when they had gone out to fight in the battlefield. And Imam Hussein had lost because all his men died. Yazid then captured all the women and he took them as prisoners, and he remained the ruler of the Muslim Ummah while Imam Hussein and his companions were murdered. But what Bibi Zainab tells Yazid is that this was not a real victory. She said, Yazid, you will have to account for what you did in front of Allah and Rasulullah. And she told Yazid that his victory and his rule was very short lived because it was only going to last for the time that he lived on earth. Because Yazid would die one day, or Yazid would stop being a ruler when the next ruler came, and then Yazid's power would be gone. Whereas when someone is martyred or when someone becomes a shaheed, his name lives forever. So Imam Hussein and all the others who were shaheed on that day will live forever. Do you remember how we said that we go to do ziyarat of Imam Hussein in Karbala? Millions of people go every year to do ziyarat of Imam Hussein. Does anyone go to see Yazid's palace? Has anyone ever been to see Yazid's palace? Or does anyone ever think, let us go and see where Yazid lived? Where is Yazid's grave? Yazid has been forgotten, but Imam Hussein is still being remembered. Okay? So that was the real victory that Bibi Zainab was talking about. So we come to the fill in the blanks. And let's see. Sayyida Zainab gave a beautiful khutbah in the court of, let's see, yes, Yusuf Yazid. Okay. She began her sermon by Ali. How did she mention Allah? It was a particular way, praising. By praising Allah. She said, all praise is due to Allah, Lord of the... Yes, Zainab? No. Lord of the Isa? Correct, Lord of the worlds. And then she said, oh Yazid, when you have kept us as... Yes, Amina? Prisoners. Do you think that we are worthless in the eyes of... Yes, at the back over there? Correct. And that Allah has given what to you? I have to check what it says. Do you remember? No. Let's see. Sakina, do you remember? No. Shayan? It says that it's a 7-lettered word. Yes, so it's going to be a word with 7 letters. Do you know, Hussein? You want to have a go? Knowledge has a little bit more than 7 letters. Let's see, Arman, you haven't had a go. No, he has given, no. Well, let's see. I don't know if yes, Amina, you have a go. No. Victory. I think it could be victory. Does that have 7 letters? Yes. Let's try that and see. Sayyida Zainab was reminding us that in this world, Yazid was the, and she was a, Yazid was the, it's a 5-letter word. Yazid was the, yes. No, it does have 5 letters, but I think it's a. What were you going to say? Yes. Loser. Okay. No, because she says Yazid was a something and she was a something. However, in front of Allah, that was not the case. Misha? Ruler. Yes, I think it's ruler. Yazid was a ruler and she was a Shayan prisoner. But that was not the case in front of Allah. Remember? Despite everything she went to, Sayyidah Zainab knew that Allah was the in taking care of all affairs. Ali, do you know? It's going to have 4 letters. So I'm not sure if it's best. What else does someone think? Sakina, what do you think? You forgot. Okay. Yes, let's see. Fatima. No, it says Allah was the something in taking care of all affairs. Yes, Shaya? Was the just. No, it's got to fit in that sentence. Okay, let's leave it and then we'll get an answer at the end. And her faith and something in him never. 5-letter word. Yes, Zainab? No, it's got to have 5 letters. Zainab? Trust. Yes. Her sermon ended with a warning to Yazid saying, try your best, but by Allah, you will never be able to something our remembrance. And that should have 5 letters. You will never be able to. Yes? Good try, but it's not got 5 letters. Okay. This shows that this wasn't a something for Yazid, 7 letters. I think we've already had it before. It wasn't a victory. Wasn't a victory for Yazid, as he will have to account for his terrible actions in front of whom? Say it together. Rasulullah. Oh, I hope I'm spelling it correctly. Rasulullah and Allah. So we've got 1 missing. Let's see what. Oh, have we got 2 missing? It says you must all answer all questions before you can complete the activity. Oh dear. Okay. We haven't lost everything. Okay. Someone said here, Allah was the best. Let's have a go. And by Allah, you will never be able to. 5 letters. You'll never be able to. Yes, Sakina. Stop doesn't have 5 letters. We need something with 5 letters. Amina, with 5 letters. Fatima, 4 letters. Yes, Zainab. Erase. Let's have a go. That's 5 letters. Okay. Are they going to accept that? Ah, okay. Here we go. 4 out of 5. Let's see. Oh, you kept us as captives. Oh, you think that Allah has given respect to you. Okay. So best was correct, and those were the only 2 that we got wrong. So Bibi Zainab said, oh Yazid, when you have kept us as captives, it wasn't prisoners, but it's the same thing. It means the same thing. And that Allah has given you respect instead of victory. Okay. So the rest was all correct. So we did quite well, I think. Okay. So the key points of this lesson. Sayyidah Zainab gave khutbahs in the courts of Ibn Ziyad and Yazid, where she spoke out bravely against them. She began and finished by praising Allah, showing us that He was the center of everything that they did. Status and glory in this world, because that's what Yazid had. He had glory, he had status, he was the leader of the Muslim Ummah. But that did not mean that he had status and glory in the eyes of Allah. Even though Bibi Zainab was a prisoner, she was much better in the eyes of Allah because she had taqwa. And that is what Allah considers as important qualities in a person, not their status or the money they have or any of those things. Even though Yazid thought he had won, He only hurt himself, and on the day of judgment, he will be punished. And Imam Hussein saved the message of Rasulullah and Islam, and as such, he was the victorious one. Okay, I think we will end the lesson there, but I want to do the Masaib now. And today I'm going to talk about, very quickly, I'm going to talk about someone called Hazrat Qasim. Okay, and I know you know whose son he was. He was the son of Imam Hassan. Okay, so on the night before Ashura, Imam Hussein was reading out all the list of the names of the people who were going to be martyred on the day of Ashura. And one by one, when he was reading the names, Hazrat Qasim was standing there. He was a 13-year-old son of Imam Hussein, and he asked, "Oh, Uncle Hussein," of Imam Hassan, sorry. He asked his uncle Hussein, "Oh, Uncle Hussein, is my name on the list?" And Imam Hussein asked him, "Qasim, what do you think of death?" Because Imam Hussein was trying to tell Qasim that tomorrow all these people whose names I'm saying are going to be martyred. They're going to be killed when they go on the battlefield. And he replied, "Oh, uncle, death to me is sweeter than honey." Qasim was 4 years old when Imam Hassan, his father, was poisoned. And he was brought up by Imam Hussein, who looked at Qasim as one of his own children. On the day of Ashura, Qasim begged Imam Hussein for permission to fight, but Imam Hussein didn't want to let Qasim go because when he looked at Qasim, he remembered his brother Hassan. And he didn't want to lose Qasim. Qasim was disappointed and he ran to his mother's tent. His mother's name was Farwa. And when Farwa Qasim went to Farwa and he told her why he was so sad, she gave him a letter that Imam Hassan had given to her before he died. And he said, when Qasim needs this letter, when he is in trouble, give him this letter. In that letter, Imam Hassan asked Qasim to represent him on the day when Imam Hussein would be surrounded by an army of thousands. So what did Qasim do? He took that letter and he ran to Imam Hussein. And when Imam Hussein saw that letter written in his brother's writing, he started crying. And then he realized that he had to obey the wishes of his brother because his brother had wanted Qasim to represent him. Hazrat Qasim was going to be Imam Hassan's representative on the day of Ashura. Then Qasim rode to the battlefield and in a loud voice he introduced himself. He killed many soldiers. And at one point he saw someone called Umar Saad giving water to his horses. And he told Umar Saad, you should be ashamed of yourself because the children of Hussein are dying of thirst and you are feeding your horses water. Then at one point, Hazrat Qasim was attacked, and when he fell, Imam Hussein ran to his help and attacked the army. When Imam came to Amru, the person who had hit Qasim, he raised his sword and Amru tried to protect himself with both his arms. When Imam Hussein found himself near Qasim, Qasim was crying and Imam said, it is hard for your uncle that you call him, but he cannot answer. And when he answers, he cannot help you. When I arrive to help you, I cannot save you, O Qasim. Imam Hussein was very sad that this was the day when he had many enemies and very few friends. And then he lifted Hazrat Qasim and he took him back towards where the other Shuhada of Karbala were. Let us recite our ziyarat for all the family members of Imam Hussein. Assalamu ala al-Hussein wa ala Ali ibn al-Hussein wa ala awlad al-Hussein wa ala ashab al-Hussein. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. See you tomorrow night, inshallah. You can go to your parents now if you like.